Welcome to the Gamut of Performance Podcast, episode 36. On this episode of the podcast, I get to talk with Coach Greene. Coach Greene has a really interesting story, and on this episode, we get to unpack that a little bit. We talk about how each step has progressed him and got him to the level ready for the next step. We talk about how he manages his staff and his staff development all the way on down to the intern level, and we also discuss social media presence and personal branding. Really happy that I had the opportunity to connect with Coach Greene. So without further ado, here is Coach Greene. Coach Greene, thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward to this. Hear a lot of good things about you. So for the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, your motivation, and kind of where you are currently?
Sure. So background, I've really been fortunate to be involved in some capacity in strength and conditioning at an early age. We had mandatory weight training as a high school athlete. That's kind of my introduction to it. Went to Springfield College, and really when I knew this is what I want to do for career-wise was my first session in the weight room with the strength conditioning coaches on staff there. Mike Kamal and Mary Kate Fight now were the two strength coaches there.
Okay.
Just seeing what they did for a living was eye-opening and made me realize that, this would be a great career choice for me. From Springfield, I went to University of Iowa as an intern, worked with men's and women's basketball there and several other Olympic sport teams. From Iowa, I went to UMass Amherst, where I did a year as a paid intern. From UMass Amherst, I took a job in the private sector as a sports performance director at a place called Athletic Republic on Long Island, where I grew up. From there, I went back to UMass after a full-time spot opened for a little over 3 years. From there, I went and worked with Special Operations soldiers down at Fort Bragg. From Fort Bragg, I was the director of strength and conditioning at the University of Mary Washington in Virginia. First ever strength coach there, so definitely a unique opportunity. And then to the current position I'm in now as assistant athletic director for athletic performance at Stony Brook in my third year there now. So I've really been fortunate, blessed to have great opportunities to be around great people, great athletes, coaches, and that's my motivation is I love my job. So the fact that I get to go to work every day and do what I do is motivation. Like I get up every day, like I'm never like, oh man, I'm tired, or oh man, I'm I got to go to work today. It's never that. It's the opposite. So I'm very fortunate.
That's awesome, and that's quite a few different environments. So will you touch on a little bit of what you've learned from each of those environments and some of the things that you've been able to take from there to where you are now?
Yeah. So I think they're all a little bit different. They're all a little bit unique, and the start at Iowa for me was an awesome environment for me. And Mary Kate Fight was actually when she left Springfield, she went to Iowa, so she's the one that. That asked, and obviously I was fortunate to get the opportunity to go to Iowa, and she was there at the time. So that experience opened my eyes to even back. This is 2008. Just seeing what they were doing at that level at that time, at the Power 5 level, the Big Ten Conference, was ahead of things that that were going on at other places. So that opened my eyes a lot. It also showed me that I really thought I would thrive and enjoy working with basketball players, working with men's and women's hoops there. Being able to work with 15 athletes is unique. It's a smaller team. You can get more individualized. So that kind of shaped some thoughts for me as I moved into the rest of my career. The private sector is interesting. Like I think there's a lot of good that can be done there. I think you get to, again, similar to working with a smaller group, you can get a little bit more individualized. You give the athlete exactly what they need. With some of the constraints that are off you when you're working with an athlete in the smaller group setting. Biggest takeaway there that I think translates to college is your ability to work at sales pitch, things like that, when you're meeting with parents and coaches and teams. It's very similar to when you're meeting with a recruit and their family, and not that you're selling them any, you're a snake oil salesman, but you've got to get comfortable communicating with different people, not just coaches. So you're selling something in the private sector. And I think there's translation into the collegiate sector in there as well. Okay. At UMass. That was really like where I cut my teeth in strength and conditioning in terms of having my own teams. My boss there, Bob Otrando, at the time, he was a guy that you didn't want to make a mistake. He held me to the highest standard. He held me super accountable to what I did. He made me figure things out on my own, but gave me guidance when I needed it. So that's really kind of where I grew up as a coach, and figured out the process and meeting with coaches and one of the biggest takeaways from him is get the athletes to believe in what you do. And the athletes believe in what you do, and the athletes buy into you. That translates into all other areas. So that opportunity was great for me. And then the tactical setting, watching them communicate with each other, the trust that they have in each other, them coming in as a team when there's just a complete faith in one another, and both their physical training, like they've all gone through a process to be where they are physically, mentally, the training process, the education that they go through to be, leaders in whatever their respective craft is. And I think that translates to sport. You're in basketball, you get your guy that, your rebounder, your guy that's your three-point shooter, your guy that's your lockdown defender. I think that, in communicating some of those messages to my current student athletes about what they do in the tactical environment, I think there's major carryover there. And then, at Stony Brook, it's kind of, I'm in a great situation here. Assistant athletic director, so I do a lot of administrative work. I'm hands-on in a lot of meetings and work administratively that I think not necessarily unique in the strength and conditioning profession, but it gives me an opportunity to do other things besides coach in the weight room. It helps develop and mentor my staff, and then obviously working as close as I do with basketball. But this opportunity has really helped me grow as a manager and a leader.
Okay. No, that's awesome. And then one of the things I found interesting, right, was your experience at the University of Mary Washington, right? So what are some of the struggles of starting a strength and conditioning program from the ground up?
That the biggest challenge initially, and I think the biggest challenge overall with starting a program, is the volume of coaching that you'll do in your first year, especially. And all of us as strength coaches love to coach. And that was my favorite part about that job, was the amount of interaction you got with the athletes consistently. But my first year there, I was by myself. And 22 varsity sports, and they all participated in the weight room. So I would go from 6 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and very little gap in between groups. So the biggest challenge early on was the volume, and honestly, figuring out the best way to manage my time appropriately. If you're programming, after kind of spinning the wheels and you're writing a program for basketball on a Monday, and then Wednesday you're writing it for volleyball, whatever, I started to batch everything together. Reading Ron McKeefer's book, CEO Strength Coach, one of the things he talks about was batch tasking, and doing, if you're going to do it one of the programs, why not do all your programs? So that job forced me to be really, really good with my time. Sure. So that would be the biggest challenge, I would say.
And with that, right, a lot of coaches, once they have been doing things for a while, sport coaches, they want to continue doing that, right? So did you experience any kind of pushback from coaches that didn't necessarily want their athletes in the weight room or anything like that?
I was fortunate. I really didn't get a lot of pushback. We had full participation from every team. I had like anywhere else, you got to earn the trust of the coaches. So, some teams had done very little in season. Just historically, it just wasn't part of what their training year looked like. So kind of educating, selling them on the, hey, and kind of meeting them where they are. If a coach had never been in the weight room before, something simple like, hey, give me them twice a week for 15 minutes and let me do some activation work, some just some basic recovery, things like that. Get them in the room. And kind of once you establish that, then it's like, hey, coach, I think the kids would really benefit from a little bit of extra training. What do you think about maybe making one of those days a lift? And then all of a sudden you're training 2 days a week in season. So it was a gradual process with some of them in season. I think they were ready for it. I think it was a position they had all advocated for a long time. So I think I was fortunate to walk into a good situation where they kind of really – it was a real quick transition where coaches were like, hey, this is great, and kind of handed me the keys to all their programs.
Okay. And that kind of sounds like, if we go back earlier, right, some of the same skill set of working in the tactical setting, right, of getting those athletes in there that 2 days a week and then transitioning. So that's really interesting to see in action.
Yes, 100%.
And then kind of moving forward, right, do you have any suggestions for anyone who may be starting a program, whether that's in college like you were or in maybe even the high school realm?
So I think the biggest takeaway, from the initial standpoint, was to sit with every coach. Get with every coach, get a feel for where they are, and what they've done, and what they're comfortable with, and just make them feel good about who you are as a person and a coach, and let them know you're here to help them. You're not here to change things. We had coaches there that went to Final Fours and had coached national champions, and it was a very successful Division III program. So I think initially, go in there and just say, hey, what are things that you've done, and what do you think is lacking with your team, and then kind of you can insert yourself in where you can help. The other thing is I would take a very, very close look at what you have resource-wise. One, program for that. Don't try and write a program for a weight room that you don't have. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, if you have 6 racks and you have 100, football players walking in, write your program for the 6 racks. Don't write it assuming you have 25 platforms. But also look at what you have and what you need, and immediately begin writing up proposals to advocate for yourself.
Okay.
From when I got there till I left there, the position is completely different. I got there was no other staff. There was no internship program. There was there's equipment, but minimal equipment. By the time that I left in 2 years, we had a full-time assistant or an assistant. Now that's full-time. We redid the weight room and got 6 more racks to accommodate. So now if there's 2 coaches in there, you can do 2 teams to minimize the time that you're in there. Went from a 12-month deal to a 10-month deal. So I think the first time you start a program, it's not going to be perfect. The administration puts together what they think is going to be the right fit for their university, but it's your job as the professional to then educate them on what that job should look like long term, not just for the temporary time or that you're there, or if you stay there long term. You got to advocate for yourself, and I was able to advocate for myself because the coaches supported and the athletes supported what I did at a really high level. So
no, that's awesome, and that's really good knowledge. I think a lot of people can benefit from, right? And then kind of moving forward into that tactical modeling, or I guess moving back, what does kind of the assessment look like in the tactical setting, and how does that kind of compare with college sports?
It's different and it's similar in some ways. So when I was there, it was they did a modified version of that functional movement screen for all the soldiers that came in. They did for lower body strength. They did a trap bar deadlift. They did a couple of different upper body variations. Now the Army obviously does the PT test, so some of that stuff we didn't do because they did already. But we tested pull-ups. We tested some similar things to the college ranks, but some of it didn't have as much carryover like it would in college. Or things like we did a 300-yard shuttle with the military personnel. We did some agility testing that would compare to the college sector, but it was a little bit less specific than if you were testing a sport like basketball, where you want to look at certain metrics for jump training and things of that nature. The testing there was more kind of get a general overview on what that athlete looks like, what their movement capabilities are, any strength limitations, and how they move in terms of like their bodies, how it functions.
That makes sense. Okay. Do you think the tactical training model is lacking in certain areas, whereas it could benefit in kind of looking a little bit more like the training of athletes, or vice versa?
I think actually, and this is about 5-6 years ago now, but the model was really good. It was a high performance model. So on our staff, I worked with a physical therapist, a nutritionist, a statistician. So it really was kind of all encompassing, and there was multiple strength coaches. So if an athlete was injured, it was very similar to a strength and conditioning setting at college level, because you had a physical therapist there present in the same building as you. Say, hey, go to this person if you're not feeling right. It wasn't like you were trying to take on all of that yourself. Or someone would come in and say, hey, I really need to lose weight, gain weight, I need to feel better. There was a nutritionist on staff as well. So that model, I think, is very, very good. And obviously has shown success at the college level as well. So there's similarities with it that way for sure. Okay.
And then how does the training kind of balance with other things in the military, right? Like such as PT and things like that?
Yeah, that was probably one of the bigger challenges there, is the consistency of training. So like you might map out a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule, and you have a great plan in place. And then Monday comes, they come lift, and then Tuesday, hey, we've got mandatory training, we can't be there. So similar to the modifications you have to make as a college strength coach when things come up, you have to do it there, but it's definitely, their schedules are pretty tight. So there's definitely, like, you've got to be very good on the fly to be successful working with that clientele.
Okay. And then how does kind of the role of footwear, right? Because in college setting, we have like lifting shoes, they have like their running shoes, they have their quarter field shoes, right? I'm assuming it's not so in the military. So how does that kind of play a role?
Yeah. So like a lot of them would come in with their basic running shoes or things that they did outside, cross trainers and stuff like that. So really that wasn't like a huge factor for us in terms of we weren't providing them with the shoes like that you would hear, like, hey, if we wanted our athletes to wear lifting shoes and things like that, that could be something we have a conversation with the coach, the equipment manager.
Yeah.
So you work with with what you have in that environment.
Okay. And then what about tactical, like injury prevention? What does that kind of look like, and what can we kind of take from that setting, right, that we might have used in the military setting and use in the college setting?
Yeah, I think it's similar to how you would look at some global interventions like a sport like basketball. They always have ankle and hip issues and things like that you address on the front end.
Yeah.
With PT, their overuse issues for them is, they do a ton of distance running, they do a ton of push-ups. They have, so a lot of times they have some issues with their shoulders, T-spine, lower backs, and then just, things like tendonitis and shin splints and things of that nature. So from that standpoint, like a lot of the conditioning, a lot of things that you would do was less pounding on their legs and more. We had Jacob's ladders, we had Versa climbers, we had a lot of different tools that we could use to build up their conditioning that didn't pound on their legs like from the things that they were doing on their own. And then from an upper body standpoint or a lower body standpoint, the corrective exercises you would do with an athlete like a baseball player or a softball player or a volleyball player who throws overhead. You're going to kind of have the same mindset going into an athlete who is getting a ton of volume in from the push-ups and the things that they do in PT. So very similar that way, where you're looking at them and you're treating them just like you would an athlete. It's just that they're training in a different way.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And then kind of from a macro perspective, right, what does periodization kind of look like in that setting?
It's a little bit different than in the college setting because, like I said earlier, that there's some inconsistencies in the amount that they were able to train sometimes. So I would kind of look at things weekly. With keeping in mind if I knew they were going to be there for a full month, that's kind of the furthest I would look at the training block for those guys and girls. So for me, it was the big thing was making sure that I had. So it was a little bit less consistent with them coming into the room as you would a college athlete. Your college athlete's going to be in there in the off season, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, what have you. So we would look at things more like on a weekly, bi-weekly schedule, maximum on a month time frame for blocks.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, and as far as like per week, right? Is it? I mean, obviously, like you said, they're doing a lot of push-ups, that kind of thing, and so I'm assuming like hypertrophy phase not really an issue, things like that. So is it mostly like a fluid strength phase, or what does that look like? Strength power?
Yeah. So we'd look at like very similar to kind of a Dan John approach, where we would kind of try and hit each pattern during each training session. And depending on what the needs were for the group that was in or the individual that was in there, you'd focus your attention a little bit more on if that person needed to get a little bit stronger, get a little bit bigger, you do obviously a little bit more of a hypertrophy block.
Yeah.
If it was a person who needed to get in better shape and needed to lose weight because they weren't doing well in their PT test, you might have them work from a conditioning standpoint that way, and then work with the nutritionist to reduce a little bit of body fat. But generally speaking, like if it was most of the regular population, you treat them like an athlete who's heading into in the middle of their off season, where you want them to get a little bit stronger, you want them to gain a little bit of lean muscle, you want them to move efficiently. So you try and address multiple things versus having it be one set training period, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then kind of on that, the last question on that area, right? What does kind of group sizes look like for that?
In the environment we were in, it ranged anywhere from 4 or 5 to 15 or 20. So it was smaller groups that we had in there. But still, with a 15 or 20 group, you're dealing with a decent sized group.
Yeah, okay. And then kind of diving into the current position you're in, right? So you kind of mentioned how much administrative work you have. So how do you kind of balance work, the administrative part with the basketball team, with also overseeing the other teams that you work with, including football?
I think back to the work at Mary Washington, I think managing your time is really, really important and being efficient and clearing out times of the day to work on certain tasks. Like, for me, the basketball practice is always in the afternoon. So the morning is when I get a lot of my administrative work done. So any programming, any meetings, anything that I need to get squared away from that standpoint, staff development is all done, between the early mornings into the start of practice. I know from 1 to 3 or 4 o'clock every day, I'm going to be wrapped up with basketball. So for me, it's managing my time in the most efficient way possible, and trying not to deviate from that. So I get as much done as I can and take care of all the moving parts that are going on here. So I think communication is key, and hiring really good people is key also in an environment like this. My staff is unbelievable. Every single one of them across the board, I trust 100%. So if I'm in a meeting, the room is running the same way if I were in this room. And the trust I have with them and their teams as well. We've got really good buy-in from the coaches. They all trust their athletic performance coach that is responsible for their team. But just having a presence, I think, is really important for my role, where the coaches know, even if I don't work directly with their program, that I'm there and they can come to me if they need something, and I'm supporting staff that works with their program. So that's kind of the biggest thing for me.
Okay. And then kind of what does the development, right? So you have different positions. So your assistant, your graduate assistant, your intern program, right? What does the developmental model look like for each of those, and how is it similar and how is it different?
So with the way I have it now with my staff is all of my full-timers have a leadership role within the department. So some will oversee a graduate assistant. We have one that oversees the internship program. I have one that oversees another full-time staff member. So there's multiple contact points throughout the course of the week, and not to micromanage, but to kind of hold each other accountable and make sure that nothing is gone missing. So if one of my assistants oversees a graduate assistant, hey, what's your week look like? Did you meet with your coaches this week? What are the takeaways from that? And really, so that person is got another set of eyes on their program at all times. If anything goes missing, and the way I try and structure it the best way I can is with the people that are here. For example, my GC, who's our director for football, he has worked at this university for a long time. He's been working alongside my assistant Joe Patrone, who has women's basketball, because in his time here before he was with football, he had women's basketball, so he could speak to some of the same scheduling and in-season, off-season. As that person is now in their new role, he can kind of speak that language a little bit to them. So there's another set of eyes on the program. The internship program has been fantastic here. Vinny Cagliostro, our associate director here, has done a really, really good job. We've got a ton of people in here every summer, really every semester, and everything from the mentorship piece, but also kind of just helping them grow as coaches. He's done a really good job of giving them a very strong hands-on experience, but individualized to what their goals are. So they get a global perspective initially, and then he does a really good job of kind of spinning it to what direction that they want to go. And then just again, I mentioned this earlier, but the presence and the trust from the coaches is imperative. I think for my role individually, so as many times as I need to, I'll sit in meetings with my younger staff and a head coach if it's a conversation that I should be there for. And I think there's a comfort level that I think you should establish early on to get what you need from obviously your staff, but from the coaches as well.
Okay. Now that makes a lot of sense, right? And with that, right, do you kind of have any advice for personal branding and like how people manage their social media?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you got to be professional. I think that's and just for anybody listening out there, when people apply for anything from an internship to a GA spot, we're looking at your stuff. We're going to look at your Instagram, we're going to look at Facebook, and look at Twitter, and if there's something off-putting, sometimes that's a real deal breaker. And in the environment that we are in right now, with where social media is, it's very common for most, if not all, people to have social media presence. So I think when you do have it, and if you do have it, if it's a personal page, you should leave it private. And if you're posting personal, and going out with your friends and things of that nature, that should be a private page. If you're a coach, and you post a lot of your teams and yourself training and things of that nature, I think that's fantastic. I think that's a great way to show what you're doing. I think it's a great way. I'm kind of relatively new to it. I was a little bit like, I'm really not into this, and then I realized how much the athletes like it a few years ago. So to me, it's when you post the kids' PR and then they're retweeting it, sharing it, posting it to their Instagram account. They really like to see themselves on camera, just like us would as athletes. So there's major value in it. I think that the key is professionally for young coaches is separate them. Separate the pages. If you really want to have a page that shows you going out with your buddies on Instagram, I think that should be private.
Yeah.
And if you have a coaching page, make it separate. You can't have both in this industry, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And then do you have any advice for young coaches on, I mean, you've coached a diverse amount of teams, right, at a diverse amount of places. So do you have any advice for young coaches who may want to specialize early in their career?
I'd say coach as many teams, as many sports, and as much as possible. I think the coaches I've been around that have the most comfort and confidence on the floor are coaches who have worked a variety of sports.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna maybe coach with the same passion and intensity with any program, but how you talk to athletes, how you coach athletes, their lingo, the way they carry themselves, like that's all different across each sport.
Yeah.
So if you know how to speak to a track and field athlete who's an individual sport as much as you know how to speak to a lacrosse athlete who's a team sport, you're going to be more versatile if you're applying for a job that has multiple teams. And who knows, like the model may shift, and down the road everybody might only have one team, and that may be the direction to go. But at least currently, there's still a lot of coaches who have multiple sports.
Yeah.
So I think the key thing is early in your career, the more teams you have, obviously the more coaching you're going to get to do, and the more you're going to be able to sharpen your sword. And at UMass, I had at any point somewhere between 6 and 8 teams. At Mary Washington, I had 22. I got very comfortable and confident on the floor coaching because I had hours and hours and hours of log time working with athletes, and that gives you people skills that you wouldn't necessarily gain if you just had one team. So, I believe it. I really do believe in that. I think young coaches should work with as many teams as possible.
Yeah, and it's crazy, like the different vibes that each team has, right? Like your women's tennis is going to be a completely different vibe from like your men's soccer or something like that. You know what I mean? So, like you said, you get to learn your people skills and how to actually communicate. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And then kind of moving forward into your personal development, right? Are there any resources that have had a big impact on you, whether that's like a book, a seminar, or a conversation with a person?
Yeah, no, I reading has been like a huge, and I think a lot of strength coaches do it, but like that's a big hobby for me. Like I enjoy reading, and I enjoy reading a lot of different things. Obviously, from a coaching standpoint, like that stuff is going to help sharpen your sword, strength, conditioning, nutrition, sports science, things of that nature. Yeah. But I've really enjoyed like just the personal development stuff. One of my favorite books, Slight Edge by Jeff Olson.
Okay.
I think is a fantastic book. It talks about kind of basically the little things add up to the big things. So, having 10 minutes that a day where you work on a task, think about it at the end of a month, how much time that really is. So being devoted to slight edge and kind of winning small battles over the course of your day to give you success, instead of looking at things as okay, I'm not going to do it because it's not worth it. I only have 20 minutes. Well, you got to look at things sometimes a little bit smaller. Craig Ballantyne had a book, The Perfect Day Formula. That I thought was really good in terms of time management. That helped me at Mary Washington. Kind of breaking up your day, organizing your time, and just being efficient. One of the key takeaways in his book is the first hour. I forget exactly how much time he devotes to it. The first hour is his day dedicated to the most important task that he has on his agenda for the day. So for me, I get up first thing in the morning. Your phone's on airplane mode. No social media, no emails, no checking anything. I tackle whatever my most important task is that day. So if the ADs ask me for, or our basketball coach, Coach Bowles, asked me to put something together for recruits. If it's whatever the case is, I handle that business before I do anything else. And he talks about in the book, at least at the very least, even if your day sucks beyond that point, you won the first hour of your day. So to me, that made sense. So those were two books that I thought were really good in terms of a resource. From a strength conditioning side, I think there's a couple that are really good. I think Cal Dietz's Try Basic Training, which everybody has read at this point, is fantastic. Jim Wendell's 531 is fantastic, especially for a young coach beginner looking for somewhere to start. I think that's a home run of a book. But there's so much out there.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Kind of an odd one no one's really heard about. Gray Hair, Black Iron. Okay. Was a really good book, just about the basics and kind of just simplifying your training and not overthinking things. And I thought that one was really good as well.
Awesome. Okay. Now those are some really good titles. I'll have to investigate because I haven't heard that last one. So interested to kind of see what it's about. And then kind of moving forward into this last segment, right? So if you have any, what are some quotes or mantras that you might live by?
One I really like is either you run the day or the day runs you. So I think
that's huge.
Speak some of the things I talked about earlier, like just getting things done, like being consistent, not letting distractions deviate you from your plan. I think is kind of one of the biggest things for me.
Yeah, and it's really easy to get distracted in that kind of setting too. So many moving parts. So I agree. And then, is there a thought or experience from your past that you've kind of held on to that has made a big difference in your life now?
I think that Slight Edge book was big for me, and realizing there's value in small doses of work over time. Especially if you're super, super busy and you have a lot of things going on. Like at Mary Washington, the 10 to 20 minute gaps became really important for me when I had very minimal time to get things done otherwise. So, look for the daily wins and the slight edges, so to speak, that can help you be successful.
Awesome. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
My boss at UMass always used to say this: major in the major, minor in the minor. And he used to talk about that more from a training standpoint to me, but I think that's life in general. I think if you major in the major things, if you focus your attention on the big picture and staying consistent and doing your job at a high level, don't worry about the minor things, people's thoughts and things that you can't control, that ultimately just make you deviate from your goals. So I think majoring in what matters most in your life and eliminating what doesn't matter is really important. And from a training standpoint, I think it makes sense too.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then in contrast to that, right, what's the worst advice you've ever been given?
I won't mention who, but I had a coach really early in my career who said, you've got to. I don't remember how it was put in context, how it was said, but basically it was if you do less, then that helps you advocate for more. So when you're ahead and you're super busy and someone says, hey, can I do extra speed and agility? A coach asks for an extra 2 extra sessions a week. You got to say no, because if you say yes to everything, you're never going to be able to, they're going to just think you have all the time in the world. You're not going to be able to get more staff and more help. And I find it to be the opposite. I find that if you show that you're willing to work, invest, and then show what you do, show the results, show the outcome, show the buy-in from the kids and the coaches, then you get the respect from the administration and the coaches, and you end up with more staff and more positions. And that's worked for me. But I've heard other people say that as well, and I couldn't disagree more.
Okay, I love it. And then last kind of question here, right? What are some projects that you're currently working on? How can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey?
Project-wise, like really just chipping away here at Stony Brook. We're at the start of basketball season, so just plowing through here. Last June, we did a Long Island athletic performance clinic here at Stony Brook. Staff from Hofstra, St. John's, Iona, Trinity College, Adelphi, and American International came down and basically had roundtable. Each staff talked. It was kind of just a networking opportunity for local coaches, and that's something that I want to grow this year and expand a little bit. And it was awesome. The St. John's coach put it together, basically a dinner in December of last year.
Okay.
And after we followed up with that, I was like, we should do this in a more formal setting. So looking to grow that. That's one of kind of the projects for the summer that we're thinking of.
Awesome. And then go ahead.
With that, I was going to say, if anybody's looking to reach me, social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all at Greene Strength, Greene Strength. And then if anybody wants to shoot me an email, george.greene@stonybrook.edu.
Awesome. Coach, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Yeah, you too, man. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining me, and if you enjoyed the podcast, please head on over to iTunes and give me a 5-star rating or write me a review as well. Next week, we'll have another exciting guest. So until then, this is the Gamut of Performance Podcast.